will go ahead and take down the please wait KGM sign to go ahead and get started if you'd like to convene the meeting.
Very good. Very good. Well, welcome to everyone. We're going to call to session this special joint meeting between the Monrovia City Council and the Planning Commission this evening, April 20th at 6:30 this evening. I do want to thank all the planning commissioners for being here. This is a pretty special meeting that we're going to be attending this evening, finalizing some of the thoughts on our general plan update. So at this point, I want to ask our city clerk to please call the roll for both the council and the commission.
I will do that. And then just a quick reminder, we've got a lot of people on, so if everybody can generally mute when you're not speaking, but as I call roll, just remember to unmute so we can note that you're here. So beginning with Councilmember Blackburn.
Here.
Shevlin.
Here.
Spicer.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Crudgington.
Here.
And Mayor Adams.
Here, thank you.
Planning Commissioners Brooke.
Here, Madam Clerk.
Rose.
Here.
Scheffler.
Here.
Sheaf.
Here.
Bachani.
Here.
Austin, Vice Chair.
Here.
And
Here.
Chair Carter Bowen.
Here.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, we're all 100% tonight, so that's good. Alice, do we have any public input?
We do have some written public input, so we'll go ahead and go with that. But first, if I might just review the other ways that members of the public can participate. So we have established a connection for people to join by joining the Zoom meeting, either by computer, laptop, smartphone, or by dialing in from a regular phone. To join by computer, laptop, etc., you would join with the Zoom app, and the meeting ID is 834-6862-7676. To raise your hand at the appropriate time for public input, just click the raise hand icon, and you'll be selected as we move through those comments. To join by phone, if you're watching from home currently, you can dial 1-669-900-9128. Again, 669-900-9128. That meeting ID is 834-682-7676. To raise your hand on your phone, you would do *9, which we'll review again later. And to unmute on the phone would be *6. So we'll keep anybody muted until it's their turn to talk. And I don't see anybody who's online right now who wants to give their own public input. And so I'll go ahead and read what we received. This is for all the planning commissioners attending. This is also posted on our website for the meeting tonight. For your reference too. So starting with Katie Cabrera. Thank you for the time you are putting into making the adjustments to the housing element for the years to come. I have lived in Monrovia for the past 14 years and have watched the city change, some good and some bad. At this time, I'm concerned with the way the housing prices are skyrocketing and the affordable rental stock is pretty much non-existent. As a resident of this city, I would love to see the following included in the upcoming housing element. 1, inclusionary zoning with a minimum of 20% set aside for affordable housing. 2, restrictions on new luxury apartments in our city as they are not affordable for those who currently live in our city and those who would like to stay in our city. 3, more affordable housing options for low and middle income families. In addition to this, I feel it is important for affordable housing options to be spread throughout our community and not concentrated in one part of the city. 4, adaptive reuse of commercial buildings. 5, easier process for ADUs to be put onto existing properties. Low-cost loans for ADU construction to those who commit to rent at a low income for several years. Eliminating impact fees, streamlines process for permits. Thank you again for your time and attention to the upcoming housing element. Okay. And I do have somebody on present, but I'm going to go ahead and read the one other public comment that we received in writing that doesn't have somebody present. So this is to the Mayor, City Council, and Planning Commission. As a member of the Monrovia Housing and Tenants Advocates, I believe it is time for our city to address the growing problems of unreasonably high rents, the resulting loss of affordable housing for families, our workforce, and at-risk communities, and increasing homelessness. Our city needs more rental projects for all categories of low and moderate income households, seniors, families, veterans, singles, and special needs. We need projects to assist first-time homeowners and low-income renters, and projects to aid the homeless. To these ends, I urge action in 2 areas. First, I urge implementation of an inclusionary zoning ordinance requiring developers to set aside at least 20% of the units for affordable housing in exchange for appropriate incentives. The ordinance could provide alternatives such as allowing developers to pay an in lieu fee to a fund to be used to provide affordable housing, and or allowing developers to build the required affordable units off-site or concurrently with the main project. Second, I urge the strengthening of applicable policies in the new housing element. These include strategies for adaptive reuse of residential, commercial, industrial, and institutional structures, pursuing financial resources for production of affordable housing for low-income populations, working with developers who specialize in affordable housing, encouraging financial assistance for low and moderate income first-time homebuyers, and working with agencies to provide emergency shelter, transitional housing, and supportive housing for the homeless. To follow additional policies, the following additional policies would also aid in achieving these goals: to increase available rentals, ban short-term rentals of entire dwelling units, and place a reasonable limit on the percentage of units which may be used for short-term rentals. Increase the number of ADUs by providing pre-approved plans. Allow people to live in tiny homes on wheels when placed in backyards away from streets. To provide immediate relief for the homeless, place Portland potties in all parks so people aren't cut off from bathrooms after business hours. This would improve conditions both for the homeless and for homeowners, with property adjoining alleys and other private areas where homeless people may go when they aren't able to access a bathroom. To aid those homeless residents living in vehicles, provide a safe parking program in designated areas where people can have a safe place to park at night. Preferably, the safe parking areas would provide some level of services such as bathrooms and showers, access to potable water, and electric hookups. Action on these policies could improve our rental market and improve conditions for those who are homeless and struggling. Thank you for your attention, Catherine McCallum. And now we have Carol Daly present who would like to speak. So Carol, when you have a moment, you can, there you are. Go for it.
Thank you. First I was on the K-Jump thing, and then you were announcing get on the Zoom, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Thank you everyone for giving me the time to be able to speak to you this evening. I've already submitted my remarks on a paper that is longer than you'd want to listen to me right now, but I'd like to urge you to please implement an inclusionary zoning ordinance where 20% of housing is set aside for affordable housing. As I mentioned in the letter, I worked for the Monrovia Post Office for 30 years, and I was working with people that were coming in, for 2 people from Rialto, from Apple Valley, from Canoga Park. They're transporting so long just because they can't afford to live in our city. We need to, I would like to suggest that we should have an affordable, Monrovia Affordable Housing Trust, where if developers don't wish to include the affordable housing in the developments that they would be doing, that they could pay an in lieu fee, and that money would be set into a trust, and then that trust would be spent on affordable housing. I'd also like to implore you to please get more low cost or low income and very low income. Retiring from the post office, I was making $50,000, so I make half of that now. And if I were single, I would actually be in the extremely low income bracket. So when we're talking about that, don't get scared when you hear about extremely low. It's not the people that are living in the street. It's people like myself that worked a good job for 30 years, and now I'm extremely low income. I'm also asking for adaptive reuse. I had mentioned like someplace like Toys R Us, where the buildings are the building above that for housing, and also ADUs. ADUs are a very good way to achieve our RENA numbers. To be able to have pre-approved free ADU plans on the city website. I've heard that Duarte is doing something where they're, what was it? Well, okay, I don't want to hold you up. They're doing something, I think they're putting some stuff on the website. But anyway, pre-approved free, to be able to have low-cost loans, 0% or 1%, if people actually sign a commitment saying that they'll rent to affordable housing people, maybe 7 years or something like that. In any matter, if you have an ADU, it's going to be housing for somebody, and so a lot of times when people are like right now, I live in a 2,000 square foot house, and at some point when I die or my spouse dies, then the house is too big for us, and we aren't going to move from Monrovia. And it would just be so nice to be able to have ADUs and to be able to have it affordable. Getting rid of the impact fees, incentives like that would be wonderful. And then as the one letter that had already been mentioned, I'm with Foothills Kitchen, where we serve people that are living in the street or people in need. And we very much need bathrooms in public places, the parks. You don't have to be living on the street to need a toilet. All you have to do is be a grandparent at a park and your child needs to go to the restroom, or getting off the Gold Line, being able to use the restroom. So yes, I'm very, very supportive of that. So I think that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carol. And just so you know, there are restrooms at the park down by the Gold Line. There are plans for restrooms in Library Park, and we're moving forward to accommodate those as quickly as we can, but we appreciate your comments. And for those who wrote in as well, we appreciate your thoughts very much. And at this point, we will turn over the discussion to an update regarding progress and a projected timeline for consideration of the general planning, a housing element, safety element, and environmental justice element. And it looks like Craig Jimenez has taken the helm. Craig, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council, and members of the Planning Commission. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to introduce this topic. We've been talking actually a lot about the housing element over the last few months, but we are doing a comprehensive review of three elements: the housing element, the safety element, and the environmental justice element, which is a brand new element as required by state law. So over the last 4 or 5 months, we've been doing a lot of reconnaissance, working with our consultant to gather data. We've been listening to the community, getting comments through various forums and surveys. And tonight, what we want to do is to give you an overview of what we've heard, the direction that we're going, and then allow the Planning Commission and the City Council to ask any questions on some of the things that we're doing right now. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sherry Bermejo, our Planning Division Manager, to start off the discussion.
All right, thank you, Craig, and good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council and Planning Commission. As Craig announced, we are in the midst of completing a focused general plan update, and so tonight I'd also like to let you know that we have our land use consultant with us. Her name is Lisa Brownfield. She works with MIG. MIG is a reputable land use and planning firm. They have an in-depth knowledge of the city of Monrovia. They've worked on past general plan updates. They've also authored several of our specific plans for mixed use and high density housing. So they're very well They know the city very well. And as Craig mentioned, we're going to walk you through where we are in the process, give you some feedback of what we've heard, and discuss the next steps. So first, we'd like to just answer this one simple question, and that is, what is a general plan? A general plan is a visionary document, and it allows cities to prepare plans to guide their growth and development for a period of 20 years. This is a document that all city planners believe it's the most important document to the city, and all cities and counties are required to have one that's adopted. The document contains 7 elements. Monrovia's has 7, and that was a state mandate up until this year, addressing topics such as land use, circulation, housing, noise, safety, conservation, and open space. But as of this year, the state has introduced that we need an 8th element, and that's our environmental justice element. So we're going to be updating housing and safety and proposing a new environmental justice element for the city. So why are we doing this now? The primary reason is we need to stay in compliance with state law. The housing element is one of the most regulated elements in the general plan, and it requires an update every 8 years. It also requires certification by the state of California. Now, anytime the housing element gets updated, the state law requires that a safety element also be reviewed and updated. And then SB 1000 implemented the law that says anytime two or more anytime 2 or more elements are updated, the city needs to adopt the general element for environmental justice. Now, the focus of this update is really to focus on recognizing the issues that Monrovia is facing. We've already heard a lot about the housing crisis, housing affordability, and availability. This update will also focus on addressing environmental factors such as wildfire, climate adaptation, and resiliency. So in general, the housing element is going to provide direction for housing-related needs and resources within our community. The safety element currently already provides direction for hazards such as seismic flooding, hazardous materials, and waste. This update is going to really primarily focus on wildfire and climate adaptation. And our new environmental justice element is really going to focus on areas in the community that are going to be referred to as environmental justice areas, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that. The goal of environmental justice is really to ensure that everyone in the community has an equal access to a healthy environment to work, play, live. The goal of this element is to address the disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences that is caused by pollution burden. The idea is to set policies and goals that address public engagement in our decision-making process, and then prioritize improvements and programs to address the community needs, the residents, business owners' needs within that area of the city. So as Craig mentioned, we have been working since October of last year in completing a technical analysis. We've been working close in hand with our MIG. We've also kicked off our community engagement process. Since October, we've held stakeholder interviews, primarily focusing on our housing and safety element topics. We also had an online survey that had a wonderful amount of response. When we are gearing up now to talk about environmental justice with the community. Last week, we launched our environmental justice survey online. And next week, Thursday, April 29th, we'll be hosting an online workshop. So at this point, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Lisa Brownfield, who's online with us, and she's going to take you through kind of what we've heard, where we are in the process with each of these elements.
Thank you, Sherry. So the next slide, please. Kind of at a high level, the housing element's legislative intent is that the state has said that the housing element has it's a vital statewide importance, and that local and state governments have the responsibility to facilitate the improvement and development of housing, essentially for all economic segments. And what that's really saying is that the jurisdictions need to plan for housing for all economic segments. Next slide, please, Sherry. The housing element is, as Sherry talked about before, it's updated every 8 years. It needs state HCD approval. We look at existing conditions and past performances. And Sherry, if you could go to the next slide. We look at the existing, as I say, existing conditions and past performances through the resources and sites inventory, constraints to housing development. We also set forth what type of need is going to be facing in Monrovia in the next 8 years, and that's really done through the needs assessment. And we also look at how the city has done and what has the city accomplished with providing housing and planning for housing, and that's in the previous accomplishment sections. All those 4 sections get grouped together and for the analysis, and then we turn that into the housing plan, which is actually the goals and policies of the housing element. Next slide. One of the components that we're going to talk about a lot tonight is affordable housing, and I really kind of just wanted to present the idea of what affordable housing is. Affordable housing is when a household pays no more than 30% of its annual income on housing. So if a household pays a quarter of their annual income on housing, then it would be considered affordable. If they spend 40%, it is not affordable. Cost burden, on the other hand, looks at monthly housing costs plus utilities. And so the household is cost burdened if their housing costs plus utilities exceeds 30% of their monthly income. In Monrovia, 40% of all Monrovian households experience cost burden. So they're paying more than 30% of their monthly income on housing costs and utilities. And further, 74% of Monrovia's lower income households are experiencing housing cost burden as well. The housing element, next slide, please. The housing element will also talk about the RHNA, or the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And I'm sure you've heard all about this. Sherry, I'm looking at the RHNA slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I went one too far. My bad. No, you're good. So affordable, looking at affordable housing costs by job, what does that mean? And these income levels that we're showing here are LA County average. And yet the housing costs that we're showing on this is based on Monrovia. So in Monrovia, the average household, if you're going to purchase it, or the average mortgage is about $3,000 per month. The average median rent for a 2-bedroom unit in Monrovia is about $2,100. If you're a computer engineer, you can see here that you can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. However, you're not going to be able to afford the median mortgage on just your income alone without being housing cost burdened. Any of the other income categories, registered nurse, elementary school teachers, childcare workers, any of those other categories, as you can see here, they're not going to be able even to afford the median rent on their income alone. Next slide, please, Sharon. Thank you. As I was saying a minute ago, the housing element will look at planning for the number of units that are established by the state via SCAG, the Regional Planning Organization. And those units are essentially called the RHNA, or the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. It is the jurisdictions required is to accommodate the new housing through comprehensive land use policy and planning, meaning zoning, general plan and zoning, but it does not require construction. In the 5th cycle, which we are currently in the 5th cycle, which is 2013 to 2021, the city of Monrovia had a RHNA of 389 units. And you can see that in the middle of the table. Thus far, the city has made progress on it. The city has completely satisfied and gone well beyond their above moderate income required number of units, but is having a difficult time with very low, and moderate income. When we go to the 6th cycle, the one that we are currently planning for, you will see that the number of housing units jumps significantly. That's happening throughout the state, and it's really a function of the state trying to get ahead and catch up to the housing crisis that's occurring everywhere. So for the city's 6th cycle RHNA, it's 1,670 units. And you can see the distribution is just about the same as it was in the 5th cycle. However, it's a little bit more on a percentage basis to the very low income and a little bit less on the moderate. So we will be planning the housing element towards meeting that 1,670 units and planning for that. Next slide. How a jurisdiction meets the RHNA, there's a number of ways. First, starting on July 1st, 2021, any of the housing projects that are approved and that will receive a certificate of occupancy after July 1st, either they be just plain residential units or in a mixed-use project, will be able to count towards the RHNA. At the end of the planning cycle, so in 2029, when we're at the end of the process, the next cycle, any of the projects that are in the application pipeline at that time will also be able to be counted. In our housing element, we'll be also looking at potential sites, the sites that are currently vacant and or undeveloped sites or underutilized sites that could be redeveloped. They can be counted as meeting towards the RHNA, as well as any of the accessory dwelling units that are projected or being built. That helps as well. So there's a number of ways that a local jurisdiction can meet the RHNA. When we next slide, when we talk to the community overall through our both our survey as well as the stakeholders, we had about 350 participants. Most of them came through the survey. About 75% of the participants were single-family homeowners. And overall, the people have said that they choose to live in Monrovia for a number of reasons. One, it's safe neighborhoods, the proximity to the recreational amenities, the proximity to the beautiful scenery in the mountains, as well as to be near their family and friends. The community also has told us that renters are challenged to find a home within their purchasing price range or their rental price range. Next slide, Sherry. The community also has told us that they are concerned that the children who grow up in Monrovia may not be able to afford the homes on their own as they become adults. There's not enough affordable housing for seniors, veterans, and or persons with disabilities. And there's not enough shelter or transitional housing locations for homeless families and individuals that are, along with the services that help the people move into more permanent housing. They also told us that they would love to see affordable housing opportunities for the very low-income categories, seniors, young families, and veterans. As we heard from some of this public tonight, that they are interested in looking at exclusionary housing ordinances and incentives that includes expedited plan checks and some lower building permit fees and increased height density and height for projects that would further some of the lower income categories. The communities talked about perhaps considering land use, a community land use trust, as well as ADUs, and the idea of a safe parking program. And the safe parking program is that people who are participating in some of the affordable housing projects, that they would be able to be issued an on-street parking permit that allows them to live in their cars while they await affordable housing. So these are just some of the ideas that the community has put forth through the survey, as well as through the stakeholder interviews. Now going on to safety element. The safety element's legislative intent is a little bit different. It's looking at protecting the community from unreasonable risks associated with geologic hazard, dam failure and flooding, wildfires and urban fires, and climate adaptation and resiliency. And Sherry's also already said that we're going to be really focusing on wildfires and climate adaptation and resiliency. The safety elements content is, as I said, those components already. And the same kind of with the housing element, we look at each one of these types of program background conditions, and then ultimately the policy and programs, and they together form the safety element in and of itself. When we talk to the community about the safety element, two concerns in the order of their ranking was they're most concerned about more frequent, more intense, and longer heat waves and extended droughts. When people were to ask about wildfire, they think that the Monrovia wildfire in the Monrovia Hills is an extreme risk. 50% of the people said that. And then we asked them about what is the most important ways to deal with the possible risk. And the most frequent response was managing vegetation and fuels by mowing or thinning or controlled burns. They thought that would be the best method to handle some of the fire possibilities. As part of our analysis, we've looked at what's called the vulnerability assessment. This is a new requirement for for safety elements. And the state basically says, go and take a look and determine where the community might be vulnerable. So Sherry, if you could kind of zoom in on the left-hand side, the map showing the pink. Any of the area that you see is yellow, brown, or pink, those are all in the city's very high fire zone. And the area that's cross-hatched or has a diagonal hatch, that is actually in the federal responsibility area. But all of that is within the very high fire zone. The yellow indicates the residential areas within the very high fire zone, and the brown indicates non-residential land uses. Sorry, there's my dog. Sorry, I really apologize. Now you can hear my husband trying to get the dog out. So as I said, the yellow is the residential, the brown is the non-residential of uses occurring within the very high fire. The second map, which is going to be a little even more difficult to show, is the area that's kind of in the crosshatched up here. This is all of the area that's in the 500-year floodplain. There are two very small areas, one in yellow and one is in blue. And the two very small areas show the yellow shows where the residential uses are that are in the 500-year floodplain. And the blue spot shows just the 500-year floodplain, but there aren't any residential uses in that. And we have produced a existing conditions, and the vulnerability assessment is going to be made public fairly shortly in a few weeks. And all of these maps will be in there so you can see that more clearly. Let's talk about environmental justice now and go to the second slide. Environmental justice. Let's talk about, well, what do we think environmental justice is? As we talked about, as Sherry talked a little bit about before, some communities bear a disproportionate burden of pollution and health risks. The environmental justice is really trying to correct this inequality at a citywide scale. Next slide, please. What a disadvantaged community is, it's an area that has a high risk of exposure to pollution in the air, water, and soil. It's generally located near freeways, major roads, and/or industrial uses. It typically has lower income population. It also has a population typically that have adverse health issues such as asthma, heart disease, low birth rates, things like that. And what happens is that one of the tools that we use to determine a disadvantaged community or an environmental justice community is the Cal EnviroScreen method and a ranking of 75% or more. So let's go to the next slide, Sherry, and I'll try to describe a little bit about what that all means. So the Cal EnviroScreen tool looks at a series of about 20 different indicators, and they're organized into two groups. One is the pollution, and one pollution burdens is and the other one is the population and health characteristics. They look at all of these different indicators. They give scores on a census tract basis. And so that's really important to know. It's not on a finer tune. It's not at a really fine grain. It's on a census tract basis. So they look at all of these indicators, give scores on the various indicators, and we'll show a slide a little bit later about the different types of indicators. Give scores. When they add the pollution scores plus the population scores together, and they come up with another number, and that number is then ranked from 0 to 100 for the entire state. So every census tract has a score. And those in the 75th percentile, so it's the top 75th percentile, those census tracts become the environmental justice communities. In Monrovia, you have one census tract, and that's shown in the very dark pink. That is the one census tract that is an environmental justice community. You'll also see that down towards the bottom right of that census tract, it also brings in a little bit of area that's in your sphere of influence. It's not within the city, but it's in it's just right outside of the city. So that's the one area, that census tract, and it's census tract number 4311. So census tract 4311 has, in 2010, had approximately 6,500 residents, which was equal to about 18% of your entire Monrovia population. Next slide, Sherry. One of the things that we wanted to stress is that comparing Monrovia to the other local jurisdictions. So you can see across the top in green, Monrovia has 10 census tracts. 7 of them have, 7 census tracts have pollution rankings that are in the 75th percentile above. None of your census tracts actually have a population characteristics in the 75th percentile or above. And so when you add those various 2 sets of scores together, you ultimately end up with the one environmental justice community. When you look at as you can see down in the environmental justice community, the second to the last column, you'll see that most of the jurisdictions around you have one EJ community. Arcadia, Duarte, Irwindale, and Pasadena, they all have at least one. There are a couple communities like Sierra Madre and Bradford that have 0, which is a little bit on the unusual side, and Azusa ends up having 4. So it's not unusual to have an environmental justice community, and the point of the community, and the point of the environmental justice element is to go back and look at how can the city set policy to improve the pollution burden and improve some of the population characteristics to make the residents who live within the environmental justice community, their lives a little bit healthier and a little bit better. So we talked briefly, next slide, Chair, we talked a little bit earlier briefly about what are the pollution burdens that we look at. Here's Monrovia's 10 census tracts. You can see a number of them, 6 of them are completely within this city. 4 of them have a split between this city and the sphere of influence, like census tract 4311. And you can see here that the different pollution, the total number of the pollution burdens for each one of those tracts. And you can also see the different categories like groundwater threat, PM25, which deals with air quality, traffic, ozone, drinking water. You can see there's a whole variety of different type of indicators that the state looks at and gives scores on. You can also see like pesticides. So in areas that are more agricultural, they're going to have their pesticide numbers are going to be significantly higher than what you're finding here in Monrovia. Conversely, a community that is really far away from, freeways and major roadways like, Huntington and all those things, they're going to have lower numbers in traffic and some of the lower numbers in the air quality kind of numbers that reflect, drive vehicles. The population on the next one, if you look at the population health characteristics, as I said before, none of Monrovia's census tracts reach anywhere close to the 75th percentile. I think your highest one is only in the 50th percentile. But the population and health characteristics, as I talked about before, deal with low birth weight, cardiovascular disease, education levels, poverty, housing burden. Those are the types of the types of indicators that the state looks at through this Encalum virus screen and gives all the census tract numbers. As I said before, when you combine the population and health characteristic number with the pollution number, you put those two together, they come up with that ranking in the top, from 0 to 100, and then the top 25th, as I said, creates the EJ community. We then go through and look at food access map, because part of our goal here is, as I said, is to make people's lives a little bit better. Having healthy food and access to healthy food generally improves people's lives. And so by this map, if you're going from the lighter color yellow to the darker color yellow, the areas that are in the lighter color, they're within a half-mile distance of either a farmer's market or a grocery store. The areas that are within the darker orange are more than 1 mile. So if you don't have a car and you're low income, for example, in this red area, the areas with the red crosshatch, it would be more difficult to obtain healthy food in that area unless you're immediately near a grocery store or farmer's market. And as you can see down in the lower part of that red striped area, there is that neighborhood and would have some difficulty because they're in the darker orange category and they don't have transportation. So in this sense, when we're looking at how do we improve food access for our disadvantaged community, we might be talking about establishing land use policies about creating community gardens, or having land use policy about how, about where farmers markets can be placed, or where grocery stores can be placed. The city's more likely to be able to control some of those type of issues more so than some of the pollution burdens, like how do you deal with traffic and the freeway and stuff like that. So we then, as I said, we then go to looking at things that are more controllable and that the city can address more readily, and that's food access is one of them. The next one that we frequently look at is park access, because having access to parks and open space will provide a healthier lifestyle and improve physical and mental health, which will help things like cardiovascular disease and some other characteristics. As you can see here, the areas that are in the lightest yellow, those are areas where a park is within a 1/4 mile of a walking distance, all the way down to the darker orange kind of color, which the park is more than a 1/2 mile away. And as you can see in our disadvantaged community area, we have a whole variety of colors. We have from the darkest to the lightest. And so we would be looking at creating policy that improves open space or park access, or some other recreational policy that's going to encourage a little bit of a healthier lifestyle for the disadvantaged community. Next slide, Sherry, please. Then in the new state law, jurisdictions are required to conduct environmental justice community participation separate from anything else that we are doing. And the intention is that you directly communicate with the disadvantaged community as well as the city as a whole, but you do focus on trying to bring in more of the participation from this community that fairly often doesn't join in community conversations. And so we have going on, as Sherry said, right now is the community survey. It's online, and we encourage you to take the survey, tell all of your friends and coworkers to come, well, coworkers if they're Monrovians or are interested in the environmental justice in Monrovia, go ahead and take the survey. It's, as I said, it's online. There's both in English and Spanish. And then, of course, participate in the workshop, which is on April 29th at 6 p.m. Our outreach will incorporate mailing postcards to every household within the disadvantaged community. There are the flyers or these postcards are being distributed at various points where food is being distributed. Food banks, I think Foothill Unity is distributing some as well. People who have expressed interest in the environmental justice public review or in the element itself have been emailed, as well as everybody who participated within the stakeholders and or community survey for the housing and safety element. We've emailed them telling them this about this. There's also been broadcasts to and announcements made at the MAP, at the coordination committee. It's been on your YouTube, your Facebook alerts, and the city manager's newsletter, as well as the city's website. And why we also say you here is we really do encourage you to get the word out, trying to get people to participate in the either the workshop or the survey. One of the bonuses of participating at the workshop or within the survey is there's a chance for two participants, two at each of the English and Spanish workshops and two at each one of the surveys to win a Monrovia swag bag, as we're calling them, which is like Monrovia coffee cups and Monrovia, just trinkets and other things that might encourage people to participate. There's an opportunity for them to win these swag bags, so to speak. So that's kind of a little bit of enticement, and we encourage everybody to participate. Next, on the next steps, I'm going to have Sherry go ahead and talk about what are the next steps after we have the community participation. So go ahead, Sherry.
All right, thank you, Lisa. So the next steps, as Lisa mentioned, we're currently going through our survey and workshop coordination. We expect to have draft documents for both housing, safety, and environmental justice elements early this summer. Staff would like to conduct another joint study session with the council and planning commission to review those documents. And the most critical one is going to be the housing element. And that's because we will need to submit that to HCD for their review. Prior to going through the public hearing process for planning commission review and city council adoption. We anticipate that meeting will occur early in summer, so we will coordinate with you guys for that meeting. The environmental review is expected to occur also over the summer and early fall, and the goal is to have our elements adopted prior to October 15th of this year. And then just a last shout out of where additional information could be obtained. We do have a very active general plan page on our city's website. Anyone can email planning@cityofmonrovia.ca.us. They can also contact me, and I think there is an error in that typo in that address. It's at ci.monrovia.ca.us. We also have our phone numbers there on the screen. So with that, we'd like to conclude this study session, and we're available to answer any questions or comments you have. Thank you.
Any questions from the council or the commission?
Tom, I have a question.
Yes.
On one of the slides, and it was talking about the RENA numbers, I'm curious, with the projects that we currently have in the pipeline or have been approved, and would obviously, if built, they'd have a notice of completion after the beginning date. At any rate, how does that affect our current RENA requirement?
So that's a good question. Actually, projects that we were looking at the release of the C of O, so projects that are getting their C of O after June 30th will qualify towards our RENA numbers. The state is actually looking at the three segments in the development process. They look at building permit or entitlement approvals, building permit issuance, and occupancy. So
Okay, and can I stop here a second? I
Sure.
apologize. It could be my mics, but I'm having a hard time understanding you. It's your words are a little blurred.
Okay. So basically, for the projects that are currently in building plan check, for example, we have one, and that's the Alexan. We will get credit for those units because they're not anticipated to be built and their occupancy won't be released until after June 30th of 2021. That's the cutoff year.
Okay.
So any units, for example, on the Avalon, we anticipate the majority will be already been released for occupancy, but we would get credit if occupancy carried over into July 1st to the next fiscal year, essentially.
Okay, but you don't have any estimates as to our current projects that are in various stages, if they were to go forward and be built, how they would affect the arena numbers?
All those projects that were approved by the council in 2020 that are in building plan check are anticipated to be submitting to building plan check will qualify towards arena.
So they will
Right.
significantly benefit us in for our arena.
Okay,
We're in a good position because of those projects.
okay, and then on top of that, we've had, and I don't know if you have a number, Craig, off the top of your head, how many ADUs we have are in the process?
We're doing probably about what, 40 or 50?
We did about 50 last year. That was last year, calendar year. ADUs are a hot topic, a hot commodity here in our city, as they are in pretty much every city in California.
Let me add one more thing. Since ADUs are really kind of a hot topic lately, HCD at this point has said to the jurisdictions, they have figured out a formula based on your past ADU experience. They've set out a formula and said, this is how many ADUs we think you're going to be able to generate at a certain income level. And they let you, and they'll say, we're not even going to question you if you assume this number. And from what we've experienced in other jurisdictions, that number is quite high and allows you to count towards the arena. If it's just jurisdiction wants to argue that number and say, here's our analysis, you can make that argument. But in most of the jurisdictions where we've been working so far in the past year or so, it's usually better just to take what the state is offering and say, okay, we'll use your number and go ahead, because it's typically higher than what the city has been getting recently. So even though it's a hot item going on in your community, we might just rely on the state's estimation, because they're giving a really good deal right now. So your next RHNA cycle you might not get such a good deal, but right now it's doing really well.
And I know it's not a given at this time, but I know there is conversation to count towards RHNA, since Monrovia and other cities in the San Gabriel Valley are members of a regional housing trust. The contributions that we make to that trust to build affordable housing, that may count in the future towards those numbers as well.
You're correct.
Which would be nice.
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. State law is changing very quickly. And you'll hear this when we come back to you with the different ideas about the housing element. No, we're asking you we'll be asking you to allow staff to send the housing element to HCD for review, and that will be early this summer. We will be talking about how state laws are changing so quickly that some of the things that we're able to count and not able to count may differ from the previous and might be changing in the near future, but these are the set of the rules that we have to work with right now. So you'll be hearing about that.
I do have a question about the RHNA numbers. When those are established, does anyone take into consideration the fact that we're running out of water, we're running out of electricity, we're running out of transportation? I mean, when we look at this, they say you're disadvantaged if you're a mile away from a park or a grocery store. And yet, when you get on the freeway or Huntington Drive during business hours, it's so hard to get anywhere. And we're in a drought. We really never got out of a drought. And it would seem to me that we should plan on how to provide water, power, and transportation needs for these houses before we plan for the houses.
That's quite logical, but that's not how RENA is distributed.
Okay. Well, that answers my question. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, are there any other questions for staff? We have another council meeting that's supposed to start here shortly, but if there's any other questions, feel free. Okay, Sherry or Craig, you want to bring this to the conclusion?
Sure. Again, thank you. We appreciate everybody's attention tonight. Staff has been working very hard with our consultant. We have, we're actually really excited about all the feedback that we've gotten from the community. So we'll be continue to take all this information and have some draft policies and consideration for the Planning Commission and the City Council to give us some more feedback coming up at the beginning of summer. So again, we appreciate everybody's feedback. If you have anything in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to any of our staff, and we're happy to have discussions with you and get your ideas.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone from the public who joined us this evening. I want to thank the planning commissioners. This is one more meeting that it wasn't on your regular schedule, but obviously a very important one. So I want to thank you all for being here. We will go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and we'll be starting our city council meeting in about 15 seconds. Thank you so much.
Thank you.